Cortés, who had been an altar boy, had never felt a faith so united. And he thought that if these natives, instead of directing their faith toward a false god, would channel it with the same eagerness toward the true God, they were going to be able to produce great miracles. This thought led him to conclude that perhaps it was his true mission to save all the natives from darkness, to put them in touch with the true faith, to end idolatry and the nefarious practice of human sacrifice. In order to accomplish this, he needed to establish power, which could only be gained by challenging the mighty empire of Montezuma. With all the faith he could summon, he prayed to the Virgin to help him triumph in this undertaking. Cortés was a man of faith. Faith lifted him, gave him stature, transported him beyond time. And precisely at the moment that he most ardently prayed for help, his eyes met Malinali's, and a maternal spark connected them with the same longing. Malinali felt that this man could protect her, Cortés that the woman could help him as only a mother could, unconditionally. Neither of them knew whence this feeling surged, but as they felt it, they accepted it. Perhaps it was the atmosphere of the moment, the incense, the candles, the chants, the prayers, but the fact was that both were transported to their time of greatest innocence, to their childhood. Malinali felt as if her heart caught fire from the abundant heat emitted from the candles that the Spaniards had put in the place that had once been a temple dedicated to her ancient gods. She had never seen a candle. Many times she had lit torches and censers, but never a candle. She found it absolutely magical to see so many little fires, so much light reflected, so much illumination coming from such meager flames. She let the fire speak to her from all those minuscule voices, and was dazzled by the reflection of the candlelight in Cortés's eyes. Cortés turned away from her gaze. Faith lifted him, but Malinali's eyes returned him to reality, to the flesh, to desire. And he did not want the brilliance in her eyes to shatter his plans. He was in the midst of Mass, and an undertaking that he had to respect and to make others respect, including the orders forbidding them from taking for themselves a native woman. His own attraction to women was, however, uncontrollable, and it took great effort to rein in his instincts. So, to avoid temptation, he decided to assign that native woman to Alonso Hernández Portocarrero, a nobleman who had accompanied him from Cuba and whom he wanted in his good graces. The gift of an Indian woman would very much flatter him. Malinali stood out from the other slaves in every way. She walked with assurance, was confident, and radiated elegance. On hearing of Cortés's decision, Malinali's heart jumped. It was the sign that she had been waiting for. If Cortés, who was the commander of the foreigners, had ordered her to serve under that gentleman who looked like a respectable Tlatoani, it was because he had seen something in her. Of course, Malinali would have loved to serve directly under Cortés, the main lord, but she didn't complain. She had made a good impression, and, from her experience as a slave, she knew that this was essential in order to lead as dignified an existence as possible. Portocarrero, for his part, was also pleased at Cortés's decision. Malinali, that child woman, was intelligent and beautiful, accustomed to obeying and serving. Her first task was to light the fire to prepare his meal. Malinali went about it immediately, looking for pieces of torch pine, a wood infused with a resin that was ideal for starting a fire. She made a cross of Quetzalcoatl with them, an essential step in the building of a fire, then took a good-sized dry stick and began to rub it over the torch pine. Malinali knew how to bring forth the fire like no one else. She never had problems lighting it, but on this occasion the fire seemed to be annoyed with her. The cross of Quetzalcoatl refused to catch fire. Malinali asked herself why. Could Lord Quetzalcoatl be upset with her? Why? She had not betrayed him, but rather had participated in the ceremony of baptism with her mind filled with the memory of him. In fact, even before the ceremony. For she remembered that on entering the temple where the Mass was celebrated, her heart leapt with joy when she saw a cross in the middle of the altar, which for her belonged to the Lord Quetzalcoatl, but that the Spaniards considered as their own. She could not help but be moved. Not for a single moment had she betrayed her beliefs. But the torch pine refused to listen to her, and that was a bad omen. Distressed, Malinali began to sweat. To fix the problem, she decided to look for dry grass. To get to the place where it was, she had to cross the field where the horses were grazing. Among them, she spotted the one that had been with her at the river during her baptism. Her silent friend, the horse, approached her, and for a short while they observed each other. It was a magical moment of mutual admiration and acknowledgement. Of all the foreigner's possessions, horses were what had most caught her attention. She had never seen such animals, and immediately fell under their powers of seduction. So much so that the second word that Malinali learned to say after God was horse. She loved the horses. They were like gigantic dogs, except that with horses one could manage to see oneself reflected in their eyes. She could perceive no such clarity in the eyes of dogs, much less the dogs that the Spaniards had brought with them. Unlike the Itzcuintlis, the native dogs, they were aggressive, violent, and cruel-looking. The eyes of the horses were kind. Malinali felt as if the eyes of horses were mirrors where everything you felt was reflected. In other words, they were mirrors into the soul. She had had her first experience with them on the day that she arrived at the camp. The effect was indescribable. She could not find the words to convey what she felt when she placed her hands on the horse's mane, for the Itzcuintlis did not have a mane, nor were they anywhere near the size of these creatures. But she had learned to love horses even before touching them. She watched from afar during the Battle of Cintla and became infatuated with them. That day, before the battle, they had ordered the women and children to evacuate the town and to remain a good distance away. But Malinali's curiosity was more powerful than her will to obey. Some people who had seen the Spaniards mounted on their horses had told her that the foreigners were half beasts, others that the animals were half men and half gods, and others yet that they were one being. Malinali decided to find out for herself, and she hid in a place that would allow her to watch the battle without risking her life. At a certain point, one of the Spaniards fell on the ground, and she could see how the horse avoided stepping on him at all costs, even though they were in full flight. That same horse was forced by the stampede of other horses to move from its spot, and so inevitably its master became entangled underneath. It had no other choice but to step on its master, but the horse did it gingerly, without letting all its weight fall on its hoof so as not to hurt the rider. From that point on, Malinali felt great admiration for horses. She knew that those animals could cause no harm. Their loyalty had been proved. She could trust them, which couldn't be said about every human being. For example, Cortez's eyes unsettled her. On the one hand, she was attracted to them, but on the other, they filled her with suspicion. Sometimes his gaze was more like a dog's than a horse's. His very physical appearance was that of a strong, brutish, and savage animal. The thick hair on his arms, chest, and face made this evident. Since the natives' bodies were virtually hairless, she had never seen a man like that until now. She was dying to know what it would be like to caress it, to pass her hand over his chest, his arms, his legs, his crotch. But in her position as a slave, she had to keep her distance. And it was what she preferred. She had already felt Cortez's gaze on her hips and on her chest, and she did not care for it. Cortez's eyes were like the eyes engraved on the flint knives that were used to take out the hearts of sacrifices. They were eyes not to be trusted, for like the eyes in the knives, they could plunge themselves into the chest and cut out the heart. She liked the eyes of her new master, Portocarrero, better. They were eyes that looked on her indifferently. But since for her indifference was what she knew best, the familiar treatment with which she had always lived, she was happy to be with him. And in order to please him, she had to carry out the first task that he had assigned to her. Hastily, she grabbed a handful of dry grass and with it had no problem starting the fire in order to make tortillas for her new master. Her heart filled with relief. She was building a new fire in a different way, with the new name and new masters that brought with them new ideas and costumes. She was grateful and convinced that she was in good hands and that these new gods had come to end human sacrifices.